Okay, lovely to be with you this afternoon. I just want to explain who I am. My name's Pat Pilkington, and I'm one of the two founders of the Bristol Cancer Help Centre. And the other founder's Penny Brohn, and I want to tell her story because it was Penny's cancer that actually led to the starting of the Cancer Help Centre. But clearly I've got to start with how did it begin, and I have to take the story back to its origins, which was 52 years ago this summer when I married my husband Christopher, who is a priest. He's now 82, nearly 83 years old. And when we married, we were just, a young couple. He was, first of all, a curate and then vicar in various parishes. But soon after we married, we met a neighbouring priest who was in the adjoining parish, and his name was Tim Tiley, the Reverend Tim Tiley. And Tim befriended us and was a constant visitor at our house and we at his. And he taught us about healing. Now, I can't, because you're all young, you've no idea what it was like in the 50s, but can I tell you, in the 1950s, you never heard about healing. In church, you had gospel stories which involved far-off days with that far-off wonderful creature of Jesus going around and touching people and their illnesses vanished. But as for now, here and now, there was modern medicine, of course, but healing in the church almost didn't exist. And certainly in our neck of the woods, just in the Midlands, there was nothing. And this was my grief. I kept saying to Tim, who was our friend and also our mentor and teacher, why aren't we doing something about healing? The church was commissioned, go forth ye into all the world and teach and preach and heal. And I said, there's a certain amount of teaching going on in the church. There's forever of preaching, they never stop. Where is the healing? And he used to shake his head sadly and say, well, oh dear, they've got the words but not the music. You think that? They've got the words but not the music. Now what I'm talking about of the heart and the spirit of passion is the music. And that's what we share with our patients and that we share with each other, and why this is such an unusual, special place. Because the music opens people's hearts and souls and bypasses everything else. So he taught us about healing, he taught us to become healers, and it became our passion one of these fine days, and it took us 20 years, became our passion to have a healing centre. But over the time that we were waiting, we were learning more and more and more about healing and about the true message that was the spiritual message, which was that we are all connected, that we are all one, that we are all connected to divinity, that we are all connected to each other. And that the different religions, which are all valid, are expressions of that connectedness, each one expressing a viewpoint. But the important thing was to find the connecting point, the overall, the overarching spiritual truth. And I used to sit and say to Tim, how do you know all this? Where is this teaching of yours coming from? It was not like anything I'd heard from anybody else. And I was good at sitting in church and listening to sermons. I never heard anybody talk like Tim. And he said, well, you see, when I was a boy, I died of double pneumonia before the days of antibiotics. I died and I came out of my body, and I was able to look down on my body, and there were two of me. And I thought this was tremendous. And this was the one that felt good. And he said, I lifted out of my body and there was a light in the corner of the room, and I followed the light till it became like a corridor of light. So he was having an out-of-body near-death experience. And he said, the light felt like love, and love felt like light. I felt as if I was being held by light and love and absolutely safe. And then I was taken to this absolutely beautiful world where I met lots of friends, and they showed me, and he said, I saw it all for myself. The beauty, the glory of it, the joy of it. And he said, I asked my questions. And as a little Christian boy, his main question was, who can come here? Can anybody come here? And he was told, everything here is about love. And he said, well, what about judgment? No, love, unconditional love. Everyone is loved and welcomed home. And when he told us this, we would just come out of the war. I said, Tim, you can't mean that. What, even Hitler? And he laughed and he said, even Hitler will get there in the end. Because he said, there is only love. And that is what you must teach. There is only love, connectedness and oneness. And if people could wake up to that, all the wars would cease, and a great deal of the destruction would cease, and almost all illness would cease, if people recognized who they truly are, that they are spiritual beings walking on an earthly journey, sent by love and returning to love. So with a teacher like that, we were just, of course, passionate about all this. And after 20 years, when we finally came to Bristol, we set up a healing centre in our own house, quite near the zoo, on the edge of the Downs. And it was there that I brought Penny Brohn, and how we first came together. Because I used to have a group of healers, all volunteer healers, and every month or so we'd sit down and have an evening rather like this, all sit round, and I'd bring a speaker along to talk about natural health of one form or another. And when I met Penny, beautiful young woman, she'd just come back from living in Hong Kong where she'd studied traditional Chinese medicine. And that was the meeting that was to turn everything around. We never know when we're having one of those amazing moments that's going to turn our lives around. And that was it. When she sat down with us for the first time and talked about traditional Chinese medicine, which is based on the fact that we are spiritual beings that adopt a body and come and live within a body and merge with it. So much merged with it that you can't say where your body ends or your spirit begins. But if illness strikes, and she was a practitioner of acupuncture and other Chinese traditional medicines, she said, when illness strikes, the first question you ask is what's happened to your spirit? Has something crushed your spirit? Has something deflated your spirit? And she seemed to be using spirit rather like creativity. And that was her starting point with us. And of course we thought she was marvellous, and we asked her to join our group, which she did, and that was the beginning of our long association. So if you like, that wraps up the introduction. We've got Penny on the scene. I'm going to pause for a moment to see, is there anything you would like to chip in, to comment on, or maybe to endorse something that's been said, just so that we can move from that part of what I have to say on to the next part. And I'd love to hear from you. Any thoughts, any comments?
Pat, how did you find healers, first of all, when you had your house, how did healers come to you?
The extraordinary thing, thank you, was finding healers for the house difficult? The extraordinary thing is, it's absolutely true that we are all connected. Because my husband and I started up the first part of our healing ministry in the church, which was St. Stephen's, down in the centre of Bristol, opposite the Hippodrome. We started it up within the church. And people used to turn up at the church and say, I believe you have a healing ministry here, I'm a healer. And we hadn't even begun, and we hadn't even really told anyone. And we couldn't understand how the message got to these people. I said, who told you? And over again, over these many years, I've said to myself, who takes the message? How does that get around? Because we are connected in a synchronistic way, in such a manner that someone like Jung, remember Carl Jung, actually wrote a whole book, or several books, on the subject of synchronicity. How we send out a thought, And he says it travels to the ends of the universe and it brings back an answering response. We sent out the thought, we're going to start a healing ministry, and they just came. And we didn't find anyone, they came to us. And now looking back on it, it still, makes me amazed that these things can happen in such a way. But when you are sort of in the flow, everything flows towards you. So no, we had a whole, and Janet Swan, who of course is our head healer now, Janet was one of the students. We were all studying together. So she was a youngster then and was studying healing. There were plenty of them, and they all worked for nothing. We were all in a very, we operated a timetable to suit everybody. And it wasn't cancer, it was anything. Yes, any other thoughts? Thank you for that.
What was the church's reaction to you being interested in healing?
Shall I tell you why we moved from the church into a house of our own? Because we had church wardens who walked around sucking their teeth, looking very annoyed. Couldn't understand what we were doing in this meditative silence with my husband, who of course was a priest with his hands on or near people, giving them healing. And they didn't like it at all. So we thought we have to move out of here. And in the nick of time, we were left a legacy. And so we bought the house and set up the healing centre with the legacy. But yes, it's amazing. Everything we've ever needed has come to us as we've needed. That includes you. You've come to us just when we need you. Isn't that a lovely thought? You've answered the call of love. The call of love is calling, calling, calling all the time. And there's an appropriate moment when we answer the call of love. Thank you for that question. Anything else? No? Okay, so there we were. Penny was part of our group. And I haven't given you a time scale. We came to Bristol in '68, and it took us into the 70s to set up our healing centre. And it was just going along quietly for a number of years, and Penny came on the scene, I suppose about, I can't remember now, 78, 77, 78. And in the autumn of '78, she suffered a bereavement. Her father died. Now, she was married, she had 3 small children. She had a very happy home life and her working life as an acupuncturist. Very full, very lively, very confident, lovely young woman. And she was very crushed by her father's death. And I often think, and I often share with patients here, nobody ever prepares us in our education for loss, for bereavement. We just have to struggle with it best as we can, don't we? So there she was supporting a devastated mother, and 8 weeks later, mother died of a heart attack, a broken heart. Couldn't face life without her husband. So suddenly she had lost father and mother. And we saw Penny, who was so buoyant, beautiful, full of life, full of energy, full of fun. We saw the light fading out of her. She was sad, she was weepy, and all through the spring of '79 she was looking more and more dejected. We were all jolly concerned about her. We got round towards the summer and we were thinking, well, what she needs is a jolly good holiday. And then she found a lump in her left breast. And there was a lot of toing and froing. The diagnosis took absolutely ages, as far as I remember. And then suddenly there was a sort of speeding up of everything, and they decided it was malignant and a particularly virulent form of malignancy, and that they must have her in hospital and do a mastectomy. And so, terrible, terrible shock, as it always is. And even though we weren't family, we were connected by friendship. And we were all devastated for her. And she was in hospital in Bath and waiting for the surgery, and they were preparing her for it. It was 2 or 3 days away. And she was in such a state of shock. She said it was as if her mind was in bits on the ceiling. She couldn't get her mind together. But the question she always asked her patients when they came to her was, why has this patient got this illness at this time? So there's the person, the particular. There's the illness, why it has figmented in that way in the body. But why at this time? It's an interesting little question. Why has this patient got this condition at this time? And she said, suddenly in the hospital, devastated as she was, sitting up in bed weeping, it was as if her mind came off the ceiling and back into her head. And she said to herself, if I were my own patient, I would ask, what's the state of your spirit? Why is this happening to you now, at this moment? And why this illness? And of course she began to answer her own questions. It's happening to me now because I have been bereaved and devastated. My spirit has been crushed for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and I've not found any way of resolving the stress and the distress, and it's come out in my body by depressing my immune function. Then she thought, I have to get out and do something about my immune function before I go into further distress for my body, which will be surgery. And she always said it was the hardest thing she ever did in her life, because she was not an assertive person. She was beautifully brought up, a typical English maiden, very compliant, always wanting to please, very charming, would not say boo to a goose. And suddenly, first of all, she said to David, her husband, I'm getting out of here. And he was very alarmed and tried to stop her, persuade her to go through with the surgery and then deal with emotional stuff afterwards. But no, she had got this flash of intuition, and she felt she absolutely had to act on it. And I don't know if you've ever had something that's so urgent that it's really pressing on you like a physical energy, saying you must pay attention to this. It was her intuition. In religious terms, it was her guidance. And she was used to listening to that part of her being, and so she really felt she had to go. So she started telling the medical people, who were not best pleased, of course, but she said she'd come back within a few days. So she got herself home, and we as healers, with Tim, our teacher, the three of us, Christopher, Tim and I, went to her. And she was in a high old state. She hadn't slept, she hadn't eaten, she was in such a nervous state, so stressed. And it was so fascinating to see that the healing, which we all gave her for about 20 minutes, calmed her right down. At the end of the healing, she was very calm, and she said, now I know what I have to do. And it's very interesting that healing works first on the emotions and on the heart. It bypasses the intellect and the mind. So it reaches a part of us that mostly we don't know how to reach. So we said, well, what have you got to do? And she said, I have to find a place that will give me spiritual help, because my problem has arisen from not dealing with bereavement. I need counselling. How could I have been so mad not to realize I needed help for 9 months? I need help for my immune system, which has failed. And there's all sorts of ways, I know, to bump up the immune system. I've got to find a quick way of doing it now. But most of all, I need help with the stress, which is absolutely killing me. She said, if the cancer doesn't get me, the stress will. I really need help. So she began to list the things we now have in what we call the Bristol approach, the Bristol program, with its component parts. So we said, oh, wonderful, what a good idea. Where did you say this place was? But of course it didn't exist. And all I can say is, it does exist now, because Penny was intuitive enough to know what she needed. And so this is where I always pause when I'm chatting with patients to say, your intuition is your greatest ally. And intuition helps at every level, not just at these life and death levels. And the story that I'm telling you, I hope will encourage you to listen to your intuition. But of course, intuition can only be listened to when you calm down. While Penny was in such a terribly excited and distressed state, her intuition might have been knocking at the door but couldn't get in. But she just had a moment when it suddenly seemed to, and she would always go like this, as if it was coming down through the crown of her head. And then she recognised it. And I'm sure lots of stuff comes down through the crown of our head and we take no notice because we're too busy. So the answer is not to be too busy all the time. And that's why we teach people to slow down, meditate, you know, to take country walks, to take some forms of rest and relaxation, because then we can be more deeply in touch with our intuitive self. And of course, you know enough about the body's physiology, don't you, to know that we have brain cells in our guts. We've got brain cells everywhere. So when people say I have a gut feeling, it's absolutely true, because we have the same sort of cells and connections, neurotransmitters and peptides, in our guts, so they tell me, which is an extraordinary thing, isn't it? Because you can sometimes get a gut feeling and not know why. But experience has taught us that we need to listen to our guts, to our intuition. So Penny got home. We couldn't find anywhere for her to go, but various people had seen a clinic in Germany on television because they'd made a program about this clinic. And quite marvellously, we found out a bit of detail where the clinic was, who was the doctor there, and his name was Joseph Issels, Dr. Joseph Issels. And the clinic was in Bavaria, not far from Munich. So they telephoned him and he kindly gave her an extra appointment over a weekend, and they flew out. They parked their 3 children with neighbours and they flew out just to stay one night in the clinic to have an hour's consultation with Dr. Issels. But when Penny walked into Issels' room and shook his hand, he looked at her and said, "Do you know why you have cancer?" And she thought, this is extraordinary. Because that was my question, she was thinking to herself. My question is, what is the state of my spirit? Do I know why I've got cancer? It's very, very much to do with me and my state of being, not just what's happened to my left breast. And she was so taken with this man as he began to talk to her, that again her intuition shafted through, and she thought, I have to work with this man. So she turned to David and said, I've got to stay. I'm going to stay. And again, it was so unlike Penny. Penny who'd do anything to oblige anyone. David was not obliged by her staying there. He came back alone in the aircraft with an empty seat beside him, thinking, what's she doing? She's mad to throw away her. You know, supposed to be coming in for a mastectomy in 2 or 3 days' time. What's she doing staying in Germany? And then, how am I going to pay for this? And then, what am I going to do with 3 children at home? So he was full of anxiety. And then she'd given him a list as long as her arm, because she'd only gone with an overnight bag. She hadn't got anything for an extended stay, which they understood was going to be weeks and weeks and weeks. And she just got 1 pair of clean knickers. I mean, she got nothing. Only the book she was reading and a toothbrush. So when we got to David, he was in such a distressed state, trying to find all this stuff and stick it in a suitcase, and saying in exasperation, and she wants me to get this to her tomorrow. And it was just so difficult to see him like that, and he was so distressed, that I said, what do you say? What would you say? I'll take it. Oh, David, I'll take it. You know, calm down, I'll take it. And so I was the one with the suitcase, and that was how I got out there with Penny. We were friends, but not that close. I wasn't family, I wasn't a lifelong buddy. I was the one able to go because I was a freelance. My work was with the BBC making radio programmes as a freelance, so I could suit my timetable to myself. And I toddled out there with her suitcase. But you see, in divine providence, it needed us to be away from home. I was running a very busy vicarage. Everybody in and out. I had my own children who were older, of course, than Penny's. And I would never have sat down at home. And she was in the same situation. We'd never have done it if we hadn't been away. It was being in that place, sort of incarcerated in her room. First of all, she wept for a week. She wept and she wept and she wept. She wept about what was happening now. She wept about the past. She wept about her childhood. She wept, and I really think she needed to let go of all those tears. And I'm told by people who know about these things that we've all got a bucket of tears inside us, and I know I have at the moment. So she wept. And then in the middle of one of her very sad times, she said to me, and it's not just me, Pat, it's anyone who gets this diagnosis, from one day to the next. You move from having a life that goes on and sort of extends as far as your mind can imagine, and the next minute you're facing your mortality, rightly or wrongly. You're suddenly up against your own death. You're moved into a limbo between living and dying. And that's what's so frightening about this situation. And where is the help for that? In hospital they help the bit of your body that's got the problem, but you're feeling it in your heart and your mind and your emotions and your spirit, and where's the help for that? And then, I now can't remember. You wouldn't think you'd forget, would you? I can't remember how it came together like that. That we suddenly realized we had our healing center with all these wonderful healers. That we had a certain amount of other things there, counselling and a sort of background knowledge. And here in Issel's clinic, we were learning a huge amount about nutrition, about vitamins, about ways of lifting the body's immune system. And we thought, well, we could bring it together. Penny kept saying, it needs to be under one roof. When you're sick and ill and frightened and poor, because she said usually when you're suddenly ill, you lose your income, so money becomes a problem. You can't go off there to a nutritionist and off there to a healer and see a counsellor over there and trek down a motorway over there to your spiritual director. You have to have it under one roof. So that's how we gathered the program together. It was a bit like picking flowers in Issel's garden and putting a little bunch together and then joining it with a little bunch of our own flowers that we had in our healing centre already. And so Penny was there for 9 weeks. We kept sharing these ideas on the phone with our husbands, who of course thought we'd gone crazy. And I kept saying to my husband, can we bring this into our healing centre? Because we were a charity we'd set up, we were the trustees, so I needed his support. And quite wonderfully it all came together. I mean, I could tell you a great many stories about the amazing things. As we needed everything, as we needed a doctor, he came to us, we didn't find him, he found us. As we needed other therapists and nutritionists, they came to us. And so in 1980, she was 9 weeks in the clinic. She came out just before Christmas in 79, and she never needed the mastectomy because her tumour had actually gone. Her body had reabsorbed her tumour. I was astonished, not being a medical person, that the body has the power to do this. And so she never did have a mastectomy, and she lived for 20 years. So you need to know that the body has these wonderful powers to heal itself. But it was quite hard work. I mean, she completely changed her lifestyle. She certainly changed, everything she ate, everything she did revolved around strengthening her immune response and keeping her whole body and mind and spirit on an even keel. And following her star, as she always said, which was really her spiritual life. And so in 1980, in October, the actual day is the 9th of October, in 1980, we opened our doors to the first patients. And we didn't charge. They came 6 at a time with their relatives. And they came just for the day. And we had doctors, healers, nutritionists, counsellors, and some of us in the kitchen trying to do the food with great difficulty, I have to say. And bit by bit we learned how to do it, but it was all very new to me. And as it was my kitchen, I was the one sort of trying to organise the food, but as I say, with some difficulty. It's a great joy to me to eat our food now because it's a great deal better than I cooked. And that's how we started. And to start with, it was 1 day a week in 1980. And then we went to 2 days a week because there was nothing else in the country. There were hardly any support groups. So people came back to us each week. And they'd come from all over the country. And we needed to have a separate day for people returning. So that meant 2 days. Then there were so many people, it was 3 days. And I had a rota of volunteers manning the office. And so it was quite a thing to try and organise. And then bit by bit we realised we needed a residential place. And as we needed, the perfect place came on the market, which you know very well, Grove House. It was the convent of La Retraite. And the nuns were so happy to sell to us. And we were able to get it over the heads of all the developers by an absolute miracle. And a friendly bank lent us the money because we didn't have any money. And they never knew why they lent it to us. And they used to say afterwards, how did we come to, because we had no income, we weren't charging, And my husband used to go and talk to the bank manager and he'd get this, it was all paper those days, not computer. He'd say, how did we ever come to give you this loan? You've got They did have the deeds of our house and they had the deeds of Grove House. But bit by bit, we had to learn to fundraise with huge difficulty. It's a very, very skilled and difficult area. And you see, we paid off the debt. And here we are all these years later, on the move again. So that's our story. And how what really was a passion for Penny and me when we sat in the clinic in Germany with our hearts just passionate for the pain of people who were suffering a diagnosis of cancer. So I wonder if you'd like to draw out any questions as our time is running to a close now.
Can I just ask you, what was Dr. Issel's first reaction to a lady that came just to have an hour's time with him and then needed to stay for many weeks afterwards?
I don't think that was exposed to him. She came for a night. She came for an hour's consultation and he kindly gave a bed in the clinic for a night because they couldn't fly back till the next day. But after the consultation, she said to him, I'd like to stay. And it was David who was the surprised one. Issels was so convinced with what he was doing and he got huge, wonderful results. He's been seriously overlooked as one of the great giants. She names him quite a lot in one of her books, which is called Gentle Giants, and he is one of her giants. And he is indeed, and his books are still standard reading. Wonderful man. So no, he wasn't surprised. He knew he got a good thing. David was surprised. And I presume the hospital, when the hospital was told she wasn't coming back for the mastectomy immediately, but then they were always so busy, so life rolled on. He was a very interesting man. I could tell you a lot about Issels. He was very charismatic, dressed from head to foot in white. White shoes, white socks, white trousers, white hair.
When Penny had the all clear, did she appear differently than before her diagnosis?
Well, when she got the all clear from Issels to come back, it was because the lump had gone. But he sent her home with a great package of stuff to continue the nutritional therapy. And with the, the big instruction that now her life had been touched by this, she had to live with this in mind. That's actually quite a difficult area to raise with people. Homeopaths talk about a miasma. Do any of you know about homeopathy? They say if in the background of your family history there's something like tuberculosis, which of course many families had a century or so ago, it's left a thumbprint in your constitution. They call it a miasma. And if you have that in your constitution, then that means there is a level of vulnerability, which means if it's to do with your lungs, you don't take any risks. So, people don't smoke now much anyway, but so you wouldn't smoke. So with Penny, she knew she hadn't got to She had to deal with her emotional issues as they arose, because she reckoned that it was the bereavement, that bottling up grief had, so to speak, pressed down her emotions, and they needed to be expressed. So that was one thing. She did a lot of therapy. When she came back, she was, of course, always on a nutritional program. She always did her vitamins and all that stuff. She always had counselling, healing, all that sort of thing. And tried to live a life in which there was plenty of recreation, where she recreated herself. So she took up painting. She became very good at watercolour painting, singing. She had a lovely singing voice. And with the family, as the children grew, they all used to take off to Brittany in France in the Easter holiday with their bicycles and cycle. And wonderful holidays. And then, you know, she and David bought a house in Crete because she loved the sun. And they did it up. It looked a bit like a chicken run when they bought it, and they did it into a lovely little place with a little pool because she loved swimming. And so she paid a lot of attention. She also was always at the theatre and concerts, and was full of poetry. If you sat talking to Penny, she'd be spouting poetry. And one of her favourite poems, there's a few lines from Philip Larkin, where he has been watching watching young people, a young couple, playing in the snow, and he thinks, oh, how lovely, that's me, I'm like that. And then he realises, no, he's middle-aged, and he turns and he sees two old chaps with their shovels and their spades painfully shoveling away the snow. And Penny used to say these lines from that poem, The North Ship. I must repeat until I live the fact that everything's remade with shovel and spade, that each dull day and each despairing act builds up the crags from which the spirit leaps, that beast most innocent that is so fabulous it never sleeps. If I can keep against all argument such image of a snow-white unicorn, then as I pray it may for sanctuary descend at last to me and put into my hand its golden horn. So she identified the crags from which despair, and each dull day, and there's many dull days when you're ill, all those wretched days when you're feeling rotten, are dull days and despairing days, and they build up the crags from which the spirit leaps. And what we try to help our patients to find is a way to make the spirit leap, to wake up that inner spirit, that part of us that is our soul, our essence, our self, which is like our guiding star within us. And when it wakes up, then it turns everything from vocation to passion. It turns everything into a joy, a remembering. And it's remembering who we are that is the secret. And this is what happens to patients. You hear them say, you know, my life has turned around since I've been at Bristol, you know, nothing is the same. Everything has changed. I wake every morning with a new joy. These are things I hear all the time. And these are people whose lives are not simple. You know, they're having to cope with a whole lot of stuff. And they're saying, I can't believe the wellspring of joy. And if you remember, any of you who have a gospel background, where Jesus says, I will give you living water. So you never have to come to the well again. It will be like a fountain springing up into eternal life. And it's that energy that fills and fills and fills, because it's not coming from us. It's coming from everything that's in the universe. It's a spiritual force. And this was where I started with Tim's story, our teacher, Tim Tiley, who told us that when he had a near-death experience and left his body, he got his head into heaven, and he saw that the other life was a reality and how beautiful it was, and that the other life is all about learning about love. And that he said, we take our earthly journey answering the call of love, taking a walk into a physical existence in order to learn more and more and more about how to experience and practice love. So here we are learning how to make relationships with people, how to marry, how to bring up children, everything that we do is all life's journey of love. And when it goes wrong, as it is so badly wrong at the moment in the world, it's because people have forgotten who they are. If everyone for 1 minute remembered who we are, that we are spiritual beings, that we have answered the call of love, to take a walk into a physical reality in order to bring our remembering with us. And then to take, if you like, the difficulties of the earth existence and transmute it, like the old metaphysical people who tried to turn lead into gold. And that is indeed what we're all trying to do, to take the lead of the earth's experience and turn it into gold. And there came a time when I turned to Tim, and we were running the centre in Grove House, and it was very busy, and I said to him, what are we meant to be doing? What do you think we should be doing? Do you think we should be trying to bring people to God? And he said, oh, good heavens, no. Remember, he was a clergyman. It was so funny. No, he said, no, you haven't got time for that. Just show them that life goes on. And then there'll be time. There is no hurry. But the more we learn and experience on earth, the more we take with us. The more we can help other people. The more we remember who we are and wake up to who we are. The more we are able to accomplish a full lifetime and take it with us back as we answer the call of love and return to love and say, I've brought you all this. This is what I've done with my time in the physical world. And as I reflected on that, and that's what I do with the patients, I don't try and lead them to God. How can I? And for many of them, God doesn't exist. But if you can show them that life goes on, and in any group of patients, every now and then, and it happened last week, there's one in the group that's had a death experience and had the same experience as Tim. It's gone out of the body and seen the body there and has moved out, so they know that they are not just their physical body. And this, of course, is wonderful when you've got somebody in the group who's had that experience, because, you know, they have an authentic voice. And I'm sure people believe what I say, but it's even more believable when one of their own says it. But as I reflected, and I leave this last thought with you, all our childhood stories, the fairy stories, the stories that we saw in pantomime, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, all those where Beauty and the Beast, I was just trying to think what's the frog and the prince, you know, all these stories are stories that tell us as children that we are not what we think we are, that we are something else, and that something else is much more beautiful and more glorious. And if you just take the one story of the Sleeping Beauty, and think of Sleeping Beauty, who, remember, slept for 100 years, and it was the kiss that woke her up. And think how the prince, who is the force of love, with such a passion, isn't put off by the fact he's got to cut away the briars, part the cobwebs, and find the beauty. And to me, the Sleeping Beauty is the anima, the sleeping soul, and kiss it awake. So what we have to do isn't to wait for somebody else to come and kiss us awake, although indeed we do wake up when love comes to us. But we kiss ourselves awake. We are both the princess sleeping and the prince. And the active part of us travels up and down the world, looking for answers, until finally the answers come and they're able, we are able to part the cobwebs and cut away the briars and kiss the soul awake. And when I suggest to patients that every morning as they wake, they take their first breath in with a thought of gratitude for each new day, where in their hearts and souls they can say, I bless you for my creation, preservation, and all the blessings of this life, then somehow this energy works from the inside out. It is like a light, it's like a power, a warmth and a joy, and it works from the inside out, and that is where healing comes from. Because that in itself starts altering the brain chemistry. And now you can put two and two together, can't you? We have this inner healer in our body, which is the brain chemicals, the neuropeptides, the transmitter activity that transmits and mediates the brain chemicals within the tissues of the body, and every cell in the body takes up these brain chemicals and changes the cell. Everything is changed. And I'm told that even the DNA can be changed in this way. So how we think is how we become. Our biography becomes our biology. You've heard that before. You know, Candace Pert's book, Molecules of Emotion. Yes? Do you know what I'm talking about? Wonderful book called Molecules of Emotion by Dr. Candace Pert, who discovered a lot of these neuropeptides. And she says that everything that happens in our lives is imprinted in the cells of our body. Our biology is dictated by our biography. The story of our life is imprinted in the cells of our body. So that when you're going through a difficult time, as many people are, you need to find ways not of embodying it, but of allowing it to move forward and out. So I think our work here has become the great source of spiritual teaching in our country today, because, you know, hardly anybody goes to church anymore, and it takes constant church going to make any sense of any of this sort of message. But people come here at a point of crisis where they are cracked open. Their lives, their hearts, their souls are cracked open by the awful distress that has come upon them, the crisis. But the cracks that crack them open and make them feel that they're splitting apart, let the light in. And that's the important thing. That the light, which is always there and is constant, the light of heaven, the light of our truth, can stream into our souls. So I'll leave you, because you can imagine I adore poetry like Penny, and Penny was always quoting poetry. And if you want to know truth, then look to what the poets say, because poets are so intuitive that they are really, really in touch with the deep truths of our world. And Wordsworth, describing our life journey in his ode about immortality, says, "Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, has had elsewhere its setting and cometh from afar. Not in entire forgetfulness and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home." He goes on to say that heaven lies about us in our infancy, and that the prison bars begin to close about the child. At length the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. But he says that it is wonderful that nature speaks to us of all that divinity, and that when we calm ourselves by walking in nature or by meditating, hence in the season of calm weather, though inland far we be, our souls have sight of that immortal sea that brought us hither, can in a moment travel thither, and see the children sport upon the shore, and hear the mighty water rolling evermore. So I'll leave these thoughts with you, and I hope that you and I and all our patients can share in this great joy and can find a point of calm in this very turbulent time in our lives, to touch back into that love that sent us on our journey, and that we can find our truth and be able to speak it to the world.